afternoon and welcome to Menu Combat, the JRPG podcast for those who love to customize their party. And I'm your host, TheWolvesDen. And for every episode, there's usually 3 parts. There is what we're grinding on, what we are reflecting on, and what's the bard's tale. And this week is an interesting one. What am I grinding on this week? I'm actually trying to finish Triangle Strategy. See, the episode that you guys heard about Triangle Strategy a few weeks ago involved me playing to Chapter 14 with none other than our wonderful guest, Jeremiah. And he finished the game, I did not. And so I've been spending the last few weeks, because I have to get back to classes coming up. I'm trying to wrap it up in time for that. And it's been a doozy. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about Chapter 17. So Chapter 16, Chapter 17. So Chapter 16 has this just sensational map. It is probably the map of the game. I can't imagine how they're going to top this. So in the opening part of the game, one of the key moments that leads to all the rebuilding of this Salt War in Triangle Strategy happens in the Norzelian Mines. So just as a key, there will be a little bit of spoilers because Chapter 17 goes into building up the end game. I'm not done, so there are some, for if you've beaten this, you know this already. So if you need to fast forward a little bit, you can fast forward, but just to kind of provide context for those who don't mind a little bit of spoilers, or for those who have played but just don't remember. If you remember the beginning of the game, the game opens with a truce being built, where all 3 nations, the S-Frost, the Hyzant, and Glenbrook coming together to mine in the Norzelian Mines. And it's supposed to be a joint expedition for all 3. It is the death of Dragan in those mines that kind of really set the inception stage of all the things that happen in this game. And so you actually have a battle in there really early in the game. And after that, you don't really go back to Norzelian Mines. They had been building it up, but you don't go back. You go back in Chapter 16. And it's one of those things that, for a strategy game, I think this is pretty difficult, to find a way to take an old map and then make it feel fresh, make it feel new. And what they do is because of the synchronization with what they're doing in the story. So what they do is that they add 2 major elements to the map, and it changes how the map plays out, and it is such a unique set of gimmicks. One of the things you don't know is figured out what have they been doing in the mines, specifically the S-Frost, while you've been gone. And so one of the things that they highlight is that because they've been using the mines, they've been using a lot of mine carts, which obviously makes a lot of sense. So what you have to do to traverse what is a bigger space, you have to call for carts, jump on the carts, use them to advance further throughout the space. And the reason why they make you want to do that is for the second gimmick of the game, of this level, which are bombs. And so what happens is that all the enemies exist and will eventually put down a bomb that you have to get to before it blows up, because the whole pitch is that if the mine blows up, it kills you and the people there. So they're making a huge sacrifice. So it builds this tension of what are they trying to hide, right? That's the key thing of the S-Frost. It's like, what are they really trying to hide here? Why would they do this sacrifice? So from a story perspective, you want to beat the level to find out why would they make this big of a sacrifice? What's cool is that this level becomes not just a route the enemy, right? Because I'm thinking that a lot of strategy games, a lot of this game has been route the enemy. And I don't mind that. I think especially for how Triangle Strategy plays differently than I've mentioned with Fire Emblem, and being a little bit more like Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, and I know people mention Tactics, I don't think you need the gimmicks of what to do to be that different. You don't get a lot of protect this character. You don't get a lot of wait these turns. So this really adds so much complexity to the map, because you need to defeat all the enemies, but you need to defuse the bombs the minute they put down. So you can't play defensive. I've mentioned before that when I play strategy games, I'm so defensive. I take my time. But this game is asking you, make quick adjustments, make quick changes. The minute that a bomb goes down, you need to plummet your character on a bunch of different mine carts to catch where they go on, but you can't send multiple people at a time. So you have to decide who is the best person who can handle the enemies that are at that location, and can you get them there and then get them out. This is the part that was making it so difficult. I played this level at least 4 times and I couldn't beat it. And I'm not really proud of how I beat it the last time, but the way my brain was going is that there are a bunch of mages that show up and start planting these bombs. So I need somebody with high defense. And so I send the tank unit, his name is Eridor. I send him, plummet him down there. And I'm like, he's on a renegade mission to get there, defuse the bomb, and leave. And what ends up happening is that I get there, defuse the bomb. I'm almost surrounded by enemies. And I'm like, okay, need to dip. But I can't dip all the way back because the fact is that if I don't defeat these enemies, they're going to just lay down other bombs. So I need to leave him close enough to get there and get back out. And it becomes this cat and dog race of, all right, who's about to plant the next one? Because you never know which enemy is going to do it. And while they tell you you have a lot of time, you got to be careful so they don't swarm so many bombs that you don't essentially reach all of them in time. It's such a great idea. I really do think, and I've said this before, and it's a current theme, adding reinforcements to a map like this is so unnecessary. And I can see it if they just did it once. They do it 2 times, and it's frustrating. At least for every time I felt like I was changing my strategy, in particular having to get used to the fact that having ice is not useful. One of the cool things about this map is that if you ice beginning parts of the mine carts, they won't move. And so I threw out Narv, I threw out the other ice person. I was like, these guys have no use. And so I had to train up another fellow. I think it's not Joshua. He has this thing where he controls the amount of special moves that you can use. And I built him up in there. I hadn't used him for half the game. And so when he talk about a game like getting you to use different characters, to change how you play, this level is just so fresh. And I think built on movement, there's such interesting things. Like, I haven't even mentioned the other cool part about the mine carts. If enemies or yourself are on the paths, on the actual laid down paths, and you get hit by a mine cart, you lose HP. So part of what you're hoping is to somehow get all of them to funnel. I couldn't really figure out how to manipulate them to do so. And I was really thinking that if I planned with Jens, so Jens is a blacksmith, and one of the cool things that he can do is that he can drop traps to like propel people. And so I was hoping if I placed a spring trap a lot around the mine, the actual train tracks, there we go, I'd be able to manipulate them. I wasn't really good at that. And so this was tiring. And I felt that it asked me to be way more aggressive than I have. And I think that is one of the challenges, I think, in a game like this, where it's asking you to be so aggressive that you have to be risky. And it's challenging, at least it is for me, where as I said, I played this level 4 times and I couldn't figure it out because I was like, how aggressive can I be without losing my people or getting swarmed by people? And that's why I really developed this idea of cat and mouse, where it's like, go in, diffuse, get out, and then if they plant one, just go back and get ready to run right back out. But you still need to find a way to be additionally offensive. That's the interesting thing about this map, is that you still need to defeat the enemies to prevent them to plant bombs. And so if you're not defeating the enemies, just defusing the bombs is not enough. And it makes it such a difficult map. And it's so fresh. It's just really hard to make use of. I think other things that I could have made this really more interesting is if I used more of the Thunderstones. Again, showing that the magic system here has some potential, where if you throw a Thunderstone on the track, everybody who's on the track will get electrocuted, but it won't be enough damage to be able to like really overwhelmingly change the battle. At least that's how I felt. I felt like chip damage and you might get paralysis, but you wouldn't get the next pieces of really effective decision making. But it's just a fantastic map. It is fresh. I haven't played anything like this. And it was frustrating. And I just don't like that at the end where it became, you just feel weak. I go back to the one thing with triangle strategy that bothers me, is that you don't ever feel powerful. I'm not asking to feel overwhelmingly powerful to like have a pre-promoted unit in Fire Emblem and just like done off the map. That's not what I'm asking for. But I'm thinking so much at the end of that chapter. I just had Serenoa and like 3 different people. And so I can't even though Cyrano is my main character, I've been developing him, I've been building up his weapons, I've been actually playing around with the other parts of the game to make him stronger. He doesn't feel like he has an advantage against anybody. I don't think any of the melee characters, I feel like they ever really have an advantage against anybody. And so I'm spamming HP pellets, and I don't like using my inventory like that. Once or twice in a battle is fine, but when I feel that I'm in this battle of attrition, like it came down to me and one other guy, and this other guy had a counter, so I'm like, it doesn't make sense for me to attack them, because I'm going to attack them, get countered, and then they're going to attack, and then I counter them, and so I feel like I'm behind on the XP trade, and so I'd go near to them, spam an HP pellet, get them to attack me, and then spam another HP pellet, and I did that for the last 4 to 5 turns. I didn't like it. It felt very cheesy. But I was also like, man, I don't want to go through this map anymore. This map is about 45 minutes. And so if you make a mistake, you're going to have to restart. And I'm not sure if I want to start off from the beginning. I think that's been one of the challenging parts about this game, about if I don't have the ideal strategy, you will pay for it in time. And that's just a more disheartening thing. It doesn't make the game objectively bad, but if you're talking about my preference, I wish there was another penalty, or there was an easier way to recuperate because your characters were a little bit stronger. Like, I get it if my magicians are getting beat, or even my support characters, right? Like if I had Benedict left, or if I had Josh, or even Ian's, where these are not like explicitly super strong characters, they're primarily support. Getting left with one of them should feel like, oh yeah, that's going to be difficult. But being left with one of your best attack units that's at the level that they're asking you, and you're in a one-on-one battle at the end, and it's not a boss character, and that being difficult, or being a war of attrition, and then I feel like I'm relying on things that are just not about strategy anymore. So that's been my main thing about that level. But it is so fresh and unique, and a unique dynamic that creates this time pressure, but it's still not wait till it's time to be complete. It's a great level. One of the other things that happened, and I was messaging my friend Jeremiah again because I just couldn't believe how great this is. The decision. Oh my gosh. So in chapter 17, so that's all chapter 16. Chapter 17, you have a decision, and the game really lays out for you what the 3 paths that you really are on are going to be. See, here's one thing I left out. In chapter 16, that is not the battle with the mines is a kind of a recuperation. Everyone's back together one more time. But before that, you have an option of 3 different places you can go. And you lose out on some information, or at least that's how it felt. So let me provide the key things here. Again, spoiler territory if you haven't played Triangle Strategy, but let me go in more into detail. So the thing with Triangle Strategy is building up the Salt Iron War of 30 years ago. And the pitch is that the war is built around the resources and the lack of resources. What this game ends up revealing to you is that specifically the Kingdom of Hyzant, which is a religious dictatorship, basically, they don't frame it that way, but that's what it is. They're basically been lying to you. So part of the pitch has been the Rosellan people who they've oppressed are people who have done something terribly wrong and erroneous. And in addition to that, part of the reason why that country is a great country is that we have access to salt, and all the other countries want salt, but they have the only salt pillar. What you find in those mines is that there is more salt, and this leads into you learning about the Rosellian history. You find out that your bride-to-be, who's a Rosellan, her mother led the rebellion, but it wasn't just that her mother led the rebellion. She found a book in the archives that highlight that the teachings are false, and that in one of the leftover places that is protected by Castle Wolfort has a salt pillar, and then you find in the mines is a way more salt. And so this is going to disrupt trade, this is going to disrupt the entire economy, and really poke holes in their Hyzant religious experience. And the question is, now that you have this knowledge that the Hyzant's teachings are false, like explicitly you have it, right? Like you had an inkling, the game had been building that up, but it is, you have the changer. What do you do with that change? And the 3 decisions are informed by the three characters that this game really centers on, which is Benedict, Roland, Frederica. See, Roland, the big thing with Roland is that you had just completed his most important character arc, which is getting him back to the throne of Glenrook after Esfrost invaded. And he has this moment where he comes to you and it's like, I don't really like the decision I'm about to tell you, but I think it's the right one. He knows that the teachings are kind of faulty, but he says it is more valuable to him as a king for people to live under this false sense of peace. And peace can be created if we give the Hyzants the salt, because they won't act out of avarice anymore, and we will adopt the goddess's teachings into where we are, and our people will not be under threat of war anymore. And because there will be no reason for Hyzant, and the Esfrost won't have any reason to win the war, so to speak. And it's so weird because he's deflated. You had spent all this time to get him back to the throne, and he's willing to be now a puppet king because he's afraid of what continuous war will do. And he keeps saying, but I want peace. Note that he's willing to sacrifice the Rosellans for this. And at first I'm like, what? Come on, be for real. But you understand that, and this is why I said you don't get to see it if you didn't choose his path at chapter 15. In chapter 15, I chose to go with Frederica to figure out what's going on with the Rosellians that we predicted. But you could have gone with Roland to investigate the corruption in the house of Glenbrook, or you could go over to the Esfrost to find, not Esfrost, you can go to find out what happened with your father. The fact that I didn't go with Roland, you can see that he's shaken up by whatever he learned about the nature of the not the politicians, but the aristocrats in Glenbrook. And so he's trying to find a way to neutralize their influence. And you get it, because that's what he sees is happening. He sees that he thought as soon as he became king, he would not have to make any more hard decisions. But the people have been swayed by the previous leader, who didn't find value in the monarchy's way of emphasizing birth. And while that conceptually is valuable, it made those who had money be more valuable than the regular people. So how different was it really? Arguably worse. That is the Roland's plight. And he's trying to figure out, how do I solve that? Because whatever he found out in the corruption, he felt like he couldn't do through his own power and means. And so while I think that's a ridiculous decision to make, it's also that, is that idea of peace worth getting, even though it sacrifices everything? The other hand is, the Rosellans are not a part of this conversation. It is about the Hyzant and the Esfrost, and what do they value? What do they care about? And that's being prioritized in this conversation. And so Frederica is like, you keep telling me to wait. You keep telling me to wait. It's been 30 years since this broke out, and you're telling me to wait another 30 years for you to do the bigger politics? No, I'm going to center my people. Because arguably, there's probably never been a better time to topple the Hyzant, because they're in a plate of desperation. And I can't just help but feel like she's right. Like, everything I felt with the Rosellans had been feeling right. And I think what they did very interestingly, and I speak to Jeremiah, he felt like he agreed, was that I think when I think of the importance of the Wolfort name, right? Because they keep making an emphasis back to the 30 years, the legacy of your father is the creation of the Rosellan community outside of Hyzant. And so the more and more I think about what is legacy, what is impact, what is importance, those are things I think about, and it's like, it's the Rosellans. But the irony is, in order to do that, you have to shake off the idea of trying to do fake peace, which is one thing. But you also have to shake off the more pragmatic thing, which is that to destroy the Hyzant's power, you have to now align yourselves with the Esfrost, which is what Benedict is telling you. Because Benedict's idea is that you can be king. And the funny thing is that the big reveal is that you're technically an heir to the throne, which changes so much. And when I tell you the knots of these decisions making, it's because that's the other thing. They make it very clear. Frederica's decision is not practical. You're likely to lose. And more importantly, what Benedict gets at is that by choosing this decision, you're not playing a political choice. You have forfeit the political venture. and you are making a choice, while admirable, you're going to burn down the name of Wolford. You're going after things that you don't even know exist because it's noble. And I think that's so great. When I made the decision to go with Frederica, Benedict got livid. And I'm sitting down there, I'm like, oh my gosh, I regret my choice. Because he's right. Benedict is the most right in this situation in terms of what will yield the most reasonable answer. Mind you, you know it's all because he cares about power. And this is really who he is. But at the same time, he's not wrong when it comes to pragmatics. You've abandoned your entire kingdom for sake of a few people. They're going to turn on you. They're probably in danger. And you're going to go into war with two political powers rather than just one. Where if you had picked one, he would have been, all right, we can finagle one. He can't finagle two. You don't have the resources. It's amazing of a choice. And I felt bad. It really confirms that Benedict is the greatest character I've seen in an RPG thus far. He is so unique because it's one of those things where any other game might have told you, yeah, Benedict is doing a lot, or Benedict is an asshole, or you might have done any of these things around Benedict. But what it is that pragmatism has value. Playing politics to a certain extent has value. And I think that's a message that I don't often see from a good guy's perspective. I think Machiavellian characters in video games tend to be mischievous people who are true wild cards, like true neutrals, or truly evil. Benedict was reasonable, even though it's wrong to do the Rosalians that they do. He's not wrong. You're likely to lose. And I also feel like I've picked the most difficult for future battles. And I think what they do to cement how difficult this decision is, and I concede happens with any decisions I made, this decision made Benedict leave my party, which is such a great component, right? I stopped using Benedict about chapter 10, so he hasn't been a part of my run. But imagine if I've used Benedict to this moment. To lose him is to lose utility. I find it ironic because I think that's, if I remember correctly, that's the core theme. He's utility. He's pragmatic. Yeah, this game has been great. It's been special. It's been fresh. It's been unique. I just wish you felt a little bit more powerful in the maps. I'm going to just be honest. It comes back to that. I wish there are ways for you to feel that you are developing some power, but it's a unique game, right? I think what this is making me think about is, how do I develop a more strategic brain? Because it means that I'm not thinking as consistently strategically as I think the game is asking me to. And I need to find better ways to meet the game where it's at and really develop that thinking. So we'll see how that goes. So that's what I've been playing. What am I reflecting on? I think one of the things that stands out in this game and the other game I have played that I'm going to bring up soon is being very mechanically confused. See, I mention all the time, I'm not a great gamer. I'm not particularly skilled. I'm not particularly brilliant. I go with what's in front of me and try to make the best decisions. And while I enjoy strategizing and thinking, I don't feel like I always use all my faculties the way that I would like to. And what that means is I can get confused, I can get lost, or if I do not have one of the phrases I've used a lot in this podcast, legibility, it can make it hard to understand how certain things work. And what I'd like to tell you is 2 stories about being mechanically confused about how RPGs work, and then talk about one RPG that feels so much more going on that I feel that they don't do a great job of communicating how it works. But I also think that that's kind of the spirit of this game. Think about what I just said with Triangle Strategy, where I highlighted being confused, trying to recognize and analyze, what are they communicating to me with this map? What are they communicating to me with the units? What are they communicating with the possibilities or the elements of this map to how to think? And I think that's one thing I really appreciate about RPGs is that it is so much about trying to unpack, engage with, how do you think about this process of experience and navigating? But there's so much you have to learn. I think if you ask me, part of the reason why Pokemon is popular is that it's, for the most part, easy to pick up on, and that's not inherently a bad thing. And in fact, the irony is that that's going to be the first story. So one of the first games I got was mechanically confused on, and people are going to look at me crazy. It's Pokemon Red and Blue. Pokemon Red and Blue is probably one of the first things that are like my games. Like I'd played games before, but it wasn't until my own first console, which is a Game Boy, and one of the first games I got was Red and Blue during the blowing up of Pokemon. And I tell you, I didn't understand anything. I was confused. I didn't know the progress. I didn't know anything. But really, the thing that stands out to this game, going back to then, is I never beat it as a child. So that means between 8 and 10, I never beat it. But I remember feeling so discouraged in one of my first battles, which is your first rival battle. I think I'd have picked Squirtle. I think they would have picked Bulbasaur. In the very first battle, I remember getting Growl. I think it was growled on. Yeah, they would do Growl, and that lowers your attack. Or they do I think it's Tail. No, Growl increases your, lowers somebody else's attack. Tail Whip lowers the defense. And I remember thinking like, wait, is this permanent? Is like my Pokemon permanently screwed? This is what I thought. I really thought that any stat changes in the regular Pokemon battles were permanent. And I remember being so stuck at different battles. I'm like, why can't I figure this out? Why can't I figure it out? And I was like, oh my gosh, that thing that happened at the very first battle, the thing that happened at the second battle has permanently attached to this Pokemon, and I can't get better. It's so awful, but that's what it was. I never played an RPG. I didn't know that the things that they told you in battles only happened for that battle. I didn't get that. And in fact, when you're talking about playing Red and Blue to beat it, I gave it to my friend to beat. I never beat them. I didn't beat them until 2004 during Hurricane Gilbert. That is when the first time I beat Red and Blue. I was 14, 15 in Jamaica during the middle of hurricane. So light is out and whatever, and I have my Pokemon Red and Blue on my Game Boy with a battery pack, playing it while the rain goes on around me. It's one of my favorite gaming moments, honestly, of like really remembering. But that's an example of me not knowing how RPGs work, because that's not a thing that my family had played. And as much as I was around other children, they didn't really communicate it to me. The other one, this is when I knew I really thought I didn't like RPGs. Tales of Symphonia. Now, I do not know how to explain this. I've gone and read facts. I've tried to figure out what happened. So, because I'm playing Tales of Symphonia, and I'm like, this is my first RPG ever, I am going to create multiple save files at different places, because I bet you I'm going to screw up something. I bet you I'm going to forget something. And so I remember I created a save file at like the fire dungeon, which is one of the earliest dungeons in the game. And then later on, you go to a water dungeon. At the end of the water dungeon, you need to trigger a cutscene to get a statue to use at a trade post to leave basically the first big area of your map. And I did that. And I remember, I think I had looked at FAQs or something where I was like, oh, I bet you I forgot something. Let me go back. I accidentally loaded the previous save file and deleted the current one. And I was like, okay, I have to redo the water dungeon and do all that. And I did it. I actually redid everything. But no matter what I did to re-trigger the cutscene to get the statue, because it's not that you just beat the dungeon and then they give you the item and you move on. It's that you need to have completed a couple of different things to trigger looking at the statue. So there's a moment after you beat the water dungeon that if you look at the statue, it creates like an imaginary bridge. You walk across that bridge, you pick it up, and you get it. And then that gets you going on further. But no matter what I did on the second save file, I couldn't trigger it. So I saw it. I beat the dungeon and I kept on looking at it and no cutscene would activate. And I felt like I broke the game. I think one of the things I learned is that you had to go visit somewhere place else, and I probably just didn't remember that to trigger that cutscene. So I've never beat Tales of Symphonia. In fact, I traded it in because mechanically it just didn't make sense. And I think the idea of progress sometimes is very confusing in these games. And I don't think we really talk about that. I think especially for where we are now, where I think a lot of things are more telegraphed and explained, we probably don't need that conversation as much. But I think it's still there. I think there's an act of how do you teach someone to play an RPG? I think that's real. And obviously what I'm talking about are experiences from youth, and it's easier for me to understand things as an adult, or I'm in the era of the internet, I can figure it out. But I place a lot more value I place a lot of value on if a game can communicate it to you, can I intuit it? And one of the things I've been trying to do is trust my intuition to figure things out. But there's a game right now that I'm playing that is not conducive to this. Star Ocean, The First Departure. Oh. Okay. Conceptually, this is really cool. So, essentially, in Star Ocean, The First Departure, you go to different towns, and in different towns there's a magic guild, I think, or whatever, some kind of guild, and you can buy packs of skills that you can upgrade. And so I think, what is it? Knowledge, sense, combat, technician, something like that. Those are the 4. And then in those are individual skills. And so you have to go to a new place to buy new skill, these packs to get access to skills that you can level up, which alone is very interesting. But what's the thing is that if in combination of doing these individual skills, you build certain, I think they call them talents. So if I do something like taste and knife, I'm building my ability to cook. So what that means is that I can get certain items and cook them. And if I cook them enough, I build my skill in that. And so that's a very low risk version of what I'm communicating. So say, for example, my main character, I am developing his skill in cooking. It means I have to cook fish over and over again. And sometimes you get something repulsive, sometimes you won't. So think a little bit of what happens in Breath of the Wild where you create something inedible. But the thing is that this is by chance because you have to keep trying. And what happens is that even though you get a high enough skill, right? So I'm building up my knife skill and I'm building up my taste skill. And so I'm building the overall talent, has a level related to those. It won't be consistent. I won't cook the same thing twice, which is truly, truly baffling. But it's low risk, right? Like, I don't need to always buy food. I'll get them from fights and so forth. So it doesn't bother me in the cooking aspect. It's like, okay, it's low risk and some high reward. And sometimes after a while you get it, but you won't always get it. That doesn't bother me. You see, that's reasonable. Where it gets unreasonable is everything else. See, cooking doesn't require anything but just the food item, just the grains or just the seafood or just the meat. That's all you need to cook. But for everything else, to craft new items, to duplicate new items, to learn songs, not only must you have like the weapon, the ore, you need an additional thing that allows you to perform the act of that thing. So in order to learn a song, I need the instrument, which makes sense, right? But you need to buy a baton. You need to buy something that can help you gain the inspiration. And so think about it. You're buying these things in the hope to learn songs, and you don't know what song you're going to get. And you won't always get a song when you try it. It might just never work. So that means you have to buy more things to see that. And there is just so much of barriers in the way to learn something. And I get it. It is such a great role-playing concept where your skills that actually, I didn't even mention this, build up your XP, right? So you want to build knife because that improves your strength every level. But it has these additional boosts for talent. But because the talents don't always work or require like multiple resources and they're not consistent, it's so opaque. It's very dense, and it's some of the best ways to do it. And I kept on saying, it's my fault. I'm not like engaging with the content. I'm looking up strategies and ideas online. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna be better. I'm gonna stop over relying. I must use it for training. The training is real. But I was like, music, I'm gonna take the risk. And I learned some songs. I was like, oh, this is cool. This is neat. Like I was like, okay, there's low risk here. Here's where I was like, you got to be kidding me. You can't be real. So there is a dungeon in this game where the castle gives you weapons. And these are some of the best weapons in games by far. But they tell you right at the beginning, if you use these weapons, we will take them after. You're not going to get to keep them. Which my brain was like, oh, so you're telling me this is a chance to create copies of these weapons. And I was like, I bet you that's it. And it made sense. I was like, okay, this is how this isn't supposed to work. The world is supposed to be interesting, give you a hint. You're supposed to respond to what you've been creating. And I realized, oh, you need this item in order to create a clone. You need this item to create a clone. And you have to go back multiple cities to pull. I'm like, so I couldn't just like put it together at that moment of like, okay, I need to make sure I built up these skills. I need to have these items only in these located towns just to be able to do it. And it won't be a guarantee that it creates a copy. That is madness. And it's worse when I figured out the actual way to do it is that you do not create copies because they'll take the copies too. You have to craft them entirely new weapons of different names so they don't take them, which frustrating. And I think a game like this is so dense mechanically, and it's really thoughtful to a way that you can manipulate training, use these skills to haggle in stores. Like there's so much here, and I can see why people consider First Departure such a classic, legendary game off of this skill system. But the fact that it's inconsistent and that takes resources to experiment in the first place that are beyond just having the item, it's frustrating. And it's very much of, I don't know how you play this without a guide or without this, because you can't use intuition to figure this out. You can ruin skills, you can ruin builds, and you'll be removed from certain things. And I think the key element here is that if it was low risk like the cooking, where I didn't need additional items, like they'll always replenish me, I wouldn't be worried. But the fact that you have to, like, sometimes you have to buy film or you have to buy specific ores, and you're like, there's no way that you would have intuited this. At least when you think about stuff like the Forge or whatever, they tell you a little bit of what you need. And I get it. It's a Super Nintendo game at heart that got remastered on the what is it, the PSP that got remastered on the Switch. I get it. It's a first attempt at this. But I feel very deflated and not wanting to engage in the systems through natural means. And I don't think I could have figured it out on my own because of how these mechanics are linked. So I'm not done that game yet. We'll see how I feel when I actually go back to the game. It was a little bit hard to get back into, to be honest. I've left the game for like 2.5 years. And so I didn't feel comfortable talking about the game from like a story standpoint or even a progress standpoint. But I think there's so much here mechanically that's interesting. I'd love to hear what people think of this skill crafting system, because I also get an impression that they obviously improved it. I'm curious what Second Story is, how they play around with this, because there's value here. There's unique elements here, and you can even hear how I think about it. And you can see that element where I got to think about role playing in a particular way highlights that there is something unique about this. That it's not just the sci-fi concept. It's not just the private actions that I even highlighted. There's a lot mechanically under the hood. It's just so messy. So that's what I've been reflecting on. Tell me some stories about when you've been lost mechanically in a game. Maybe like me from the very beginning of your gaming experience, or even now in RPGs. I know I have a group chat who's playing Baldur's Gate 3 for the first time and hearing their stories of trying to figure out mechanically how these things work. And maybe one day I'll play Baldur's Gate 3 to know what that's like. But it's always refreshing to hear that. I think being in states of confusion can be useful. I think the question is, can games equip you for this? There's a whole theoretical framework I'll talk about one day about this, but I'm not going to bring my academia perspective in here. I'll leave that for now. One day we'll talk about specifically adidactical theory in gaming, because that's like my heart, but that's for a different time. Now, what is the Bard's Tale? So I felt two different songs. The first song is Fly By Contact for Star Ocean Till the End of Time. They are using like a clock ticking as like the core percussion. It sounds like a Timex watch, like with maximum gain attached on it, and you're building what feels like some hi-hats and a little bit of a snare. And then you have a log drum buried all the way deep in the mix that's basically being your kick, that's not super consistent. And there's a moment where the piano and synth comes at the same time, and it's the piano and the strings come in the same time, and the piano is in the synth sound. And it's weird, right? Because I would always think, like, if you're having like these illustrious, pretty harp strings, how do you play something more synthetic? No pun intended, but something more non-natural sounding and make it all work together. It's a beautiful song. Fly By Contact. The mixture of tones here is just truly, truly superb. And the other song for this week is from Langrisser 2 called Errant Night. This is just a rock heaven. This has this on and off, stops sputtering guitar, that drum break at the beginning, like it plays with breaks, and so there's so many different stabs. So like they'll have a chord guitar and they'll have stabs of different sounds later, and then how they bring back the intro for the hook. It's just so powerful, and it's just multiple flourishes of how the anthemic rock sound is. And so this is Langrisser 2 Errant Night. This is from the remake. So I don't know if it's the original soundtrack. I'm guessing it's a remastered OST. And I've sampled this, and the drums on this are so interesting. Sampling this song is so hard because there's so many layers going on, but truly, if you're a rock fan, if you enjoy like the progressive rock in RPG music, this is just banging. And so that was this week's episode of Menu Combat. I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen. I hope you have a wonderful week. I hope you get to spend some time customizing your party, some time reflecting. Hope you have some peace and joy. I'm extremely grateful. If you'd like to leave a review, please leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I'd love to hear what you want me to improve on, some other things that you think about. You can find me again, TheWolvesDen, at TheWolvesDen25 on Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, Twitter. And you can find Menu Combat on Instagram, Twitter, and Threads. We would love to hear your feedback. We appreciate you taking your time. It means a lot to me. We're nearing the end of season 1 of Menu Combat. As I mentioned earlier, I'm getting ready for classes. So that means that season 2 won't happen for a while, but there will be intermittent episodes. Think of them as like a 2.5 HD remix kind of energy. But I thank you guys for being a part of this very first season, inaugural season of Menu Combat. But we're not done yet. I just want to say we're wrapping up, and I also say that to say if there's a game you want me to talk about that's pretty short, this is probably the time to ask, because you will just get sporadic episodes until season 2 starts. On that note, peace, love, unity.